Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another FP&A Trends webinar. And the subject today is dynamic and immediate revenue planning process in uncertain environment. We will look at the insights from Microsoft and Emirates Airline. My name is Larissa Melnichuk. I'm Managing Director and Founder at FP&A Trends Group and International FP&A Board. And today I will be the facilitator of this very interesting meeting. Just to let you know that the main mission of our webinars is to share the latest trends and developments in modern financial planning and analysis, and our community really global. Today we have more than 520 registrations from 53 countries, but more than 60% of the registrants are coming from North America. Just a quick update on the agenda for today. So we will look very quickly on evolution of revenue planning from passive to strategic. We will look at two case studies. Firstly, from Emirates Airline about the revenue management, revenue planning, and then machine learning revenue forecasting from Microsoft. It would be Microsoft case study. And the last subject, it would be about technology-driven revenue planning process. We will have conclusions and recommendations as usual, Q&A session as well at the end. And now I would like to invite our panelists to switch on their cameras, please. So we have Anand, we have Wiba, we have Liran. Welcome, everyone. I would like to start very quick introduction, and I prepared very quick background slides as well. We will start from Anand Lakshmi Narayan, who is Senior VP Revenue Management and Airline Partnership at Emirates Airline. Anand joined us today from Dubai, and as you can hear from this background, he's fully responsible for revenue management in this organization, the revenue management function. Also, his responsibilities are product pricing, inventory management, distribution, commercial systems, operations research, airline partnership. He's been with the company for over 20+ years, and he held key management positions over those years, delivering millions of profit increases. Anand, welcome to the webinar, and I'm so happy to see you here.
Thank you, Larissa.
Welcome, Anand. Then we have Wiba Spekin, who is Regional CFO for multi-country Eastern Europe at Microsoft. Wiba is a member of our Amsterdam FP&A board, where we met some time ago. And with his current job, Wiba is responsible for 28 countries in Eastern Europe. But previously, he worked for Microsoft in different geographies, including US. He's very experienced in strategic business planning, financial management, and compliance. And I know that revenue planning, it was and continues to be a very big part of the job. Very creative thinker with extensive experience in influencing and driving strategic business discussion. And today, Wiba is going to share with us this amazing process that is called AI-enabled revenue planning process in Microsoft. Wiba, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to share my experience with the audience today. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And by the way, Wiba joins us from Amsterdam, the Netherlands. A very international panel again. Then our third panelist is Dr. Liran Edelist. Many of you know Dr. Liran. By the way, our previous webinar was about FP&A, and now we expand into a particular subject. So Dr. Liran is president at JEDEX, responsible for the whole Americas. He has PhD in business administration, and he's quite well-known EPM expert and thought leader in the area of FP&A, strategic finance, with over 20 years of experience. At the moment, he's visiting professor at various academic and professional institutes, and previously he founded and was a CFO at top IT company leading EPM practice before this company was merged and was sold to one of the major CPM providers. He worked with C-level executives at different global organizations, including Microsoft, Amazon, Pfizer, Cemex, Obertag, Amdoc, and so on and so far. Liran, welcome to FP&A Trends webinar.
Thank you, Larissa, and thank you for the participants. I'm really happy to be here.
And Liran joins us from Boston, US today. And I'm based in the UK, just outside of London. A very quick background, and I would like to invite our panelists to switch off the cameras, just a few slides before we start the presentations. I would like to give a very quick background of my experience and also FP&A Trends Group. So I'm British qualified accountant, CIMA qualified accountant, certified FP&A professional, and previously I worked as a practitioner leading FP&A teams in Europe and also globally for different big organizations. With International FP&A Board, I traveled the world to 27 cities, 16 countries. You can see all of them over here. And we established FP&A boards there. We continue our travel digitally, and today we are going to share our experience with us. Very quickly about this webinar. It's 1 hour webinar. Your participation is welcome. There will be 2 polling questions. There will be interactive Q&A session, and you can start to send your questions via chat box straight away when the first presentation starts. Before we start, I would like to say thank you so much to our technology sponsor. Thank you so much, JEDEX. This is the company that provides modern FP&A technology. And let me start very quickly on this basic slide. Evolution of revenue planning for FP&A from passive to strategic. When we prepared for this webinar, we were thinking that depending on how you answer to this question, what is the function of revenue planning in your company, it's really would mean how mature is your company on analytics maturity model. The reality is that traditionally it was really very passive function for FP&A, where all the targets were cascaded from the top and then were calculated from the bottom, and the role of FP&A was to calculate it. But obviously, in this incredible world, everything is changing, and modern technology becomes a key element in surviving the downfall in revenue. And we can see a lot of examples when we play different scenarios in revenue. It's a very collaborative process. Automation helps us to save a lot of time. It's about data management and integration and working on incentives. And of course, scenarios could be played in real time, and high analytics, predictive analytics, how we call it, it really can give us a lot of additional information to plan our revenue. And now I would like to invite Anand, Senior VP Revenue Management and Airline Partnership at Emirates Airline, to talk about revenue planning strategy under the next normal. The planning under the next normal in his organization. Anand, you're welcome. Please, can you switch on your camera?
Thank you, Larissa, for the introduction. Hello, everybody. Have a good day. I'm glad to be here today. I'll be sharing some insights on the case study relating to the revenue planning strategy in Emirates Airline with a particular context of the pandemic. As we know, the traditional revenue planning is all about connecting dots in a meaningful way to form a pattern. It's more, so there are 2 components to traditional revenue planning. One is the demand side, another one is the quality of revenue. The demand side is more of an art than exact science, whereas the quality of revenue is more of exact science. So in summary, the traditional revenue planning is a fine balance between science and art. Now, the traditional revenue planning was challenged by the pandemic over the last 1 year. It completely upset the fundamentals of traditional revenue planning. The demand planning had changed completely in the last 1 year. That's because of a few interdependent conditions like the regulatory landscape imposed by various countries, on travel restrictions and all other associated conditions. Therefore, the history-based models were rendered ineffective or completely unreliable. Now, we start to see a few new travel behaviors, and we also noticed quite a lot of differences in the customer expectations. Now, how this matters is because these are the ingredients of demand planning. And when these ingredients have started to be upset and changed completely, then the traditional revenue models have to be completely reset. So this is where, if you move on to the next slide, we're talking about the solution to how we manage the situation. Can we go to the next slide? Well, now we had a few choices. Now, we had to switch immediately to an agile mode. So we formed an agile team to be able to look into the immediate challenges associated with the pandemic. That was relating to the demand. So the custom-built tools and processes had to be invoked. So in order to do that, we had to have a very clear understanding of what was impacting the demand scenario, and we also had to understand the new trends. Now, there are a few pointers that came out when we started to look into it, and that's what I'm trying to present here in the case study. Immediately we came to a realization that the impact of the pandemic was going to be severe. We acknowledged the enormity of the situation, and that was very relevant and that was very important, because if we do not see the gravity of the situation, it's going to be extremely difficult to set out a plan and to be able to mitigate the issues associated with that. The unreliability of predictions was one of the major challenges. The industry pundits came with quite a lot of different scenarios. Now, through our experience, we found that a lot of these external analyses were rendered ineffective, or they were vastly different from what transpired. There were various demand resumption theories floating around, like a U-shaped recovery, a V-shaped recovery, a W-shaped recovery. But what we experienced over the last 1 year was completely different from what historically the demand resumption curves had dictated. So therefore, we decided fairly at the early stage of the pandemic that we had to build an internal model. We had to really understand the components of what was influencing the demand in the current context, that means in the context of the pandemic, and then start to build a predictive forecast model around that. So if you move on to the next slide, we have set out a few critical elements as part of this. One is the COVID monitoring, the monitoring of the virus itself. The reason why it was important was a lot of the demand influencing factors were influenced by the government effectiveness to control the infection. And also we had to understand clearly the various infection stages of the virus itself, because each stage of the virus had a very different demand driver and very different influence in terms of the travel behavior. So therefore, it was very important for us to understand, to be able to build a meaningful algorithm to address the issue. And we studied the propensity of the demand. Traditionally, the propensities were based on economic criteria. But in the current context, or in the new normal, we found that the propensity drivers were very different. At the early part of the pandemic, we saw that the willingness to pay was very high. So that was factored in. But at some point in time later on, that wasn't the case. People, when they started to feel more comfortable about the travel, the hygiene factor, the health factor, then the economic criteria was different. So all those parameters had to be understood and clearly set out in the algorithm. So the new segmentation, the new buying behavior, all these had to be understood very clearly. If you move on to the next slide, the critical part of it is to set a new profitability mandate. In the context of an airline industry, which is a highly capital-intensive industry, very high cost, the fixed cost is a significantly higher proportion, so it starts at a very high level. So what it means is, for us to be able to cover the cash operating cost and move on to start to mitigate the fixed operating cost, we had to have a minimal level of operation to be able to cover the cash operating cost. So we took a step approach in terms of targeting the cash break even first to sustain, to start to generate cash, and to be able to then mitigate some of the sunk costs associated with a capital intensive industry. It was very important to have a micro level due diligence. It was almost like a war room approach. So every day we would sit in the morning to try and understand what happened the previous day, what was the forecast, and what was the delta between the actual and the forecast, and what constituted the change, and therefore factor that in for the immediate days and for the following week. So that's a war room approach, and we had to have this agile team. Now, what came into our rescue was the ability of our data science team, in-house team, to be able to rely on data science. We started to build a machine learning model. It's very important to understand that role technology plays in any sort of demand planning. The traditional context did not require data science or the machine learning model, but the reason why we had to adopt this is because of the iterative process that is the forecasting. So we had to continuously move forward to be able to try and understand the various changes that was happening during the different stages of the pandemic. So we set up something called an epidemiological SEER model, which addressed 4 stages of the pandemic itself: the susceptibility of the pandemic, and then the infectious stage, and the exposure, and finally the recovery stage. So each one had different demand influences, and we started to build the algorithm accordingly. Initially, we had a huge difference in terms of the outcome, but as we started to finesse, as we started to build more algorithms, we were able to get to the reasonable accuracy. And we used something called a Bayesian optimization parameter calibration, which is again using the industry data tools, but using internal calibration models. So what is the learning coming out of all the case study? If you look into the next slide, these are a few key pointers. One is it's very important for us to understand the agility that's required in responding to these business challenges, more so in the current context, which is constantly changing and very dynamic. And we had to use a predictive data modeling, the forecast modeling. Data science techniques were key, and which was helpful in providing some intuitive analysis. We set very clear economic criteria without which we will be rudderless. So it's very important to set a clear economic criteria. As I mentioned, stage 1, cash break even. Stage 2 is fully loaded cost to be covered. Finally, the recommendation is be optimistic. As a planner, we always have to be very optimistic. But that said, we got to plan for the worst, because we're being confronted by something that the industry or the world has not seen in the last 60, 70 years. So therefore, we need to have multiple scenarios, the worst case scenario, just so that if we falter in the optimistic scenario, that we have a fallback in place. So that summarizes really the case study, and I'm happy to take any comments.
Anand, thank you so much. What a great presentation, and a lot to learn from you, from your industry, for all of us. I would like to invite all our panelists to switch on the cameras and to comment on Anand's presentation. Wiba, what would be your key takeaways and some additional subject matter?
Well, I think it's really nice to see, and it's a good bridge to the presentation that I will talk about, is the usage of machine learning and artificial intelligence with regards to revenue planning. But I think a broader statement that I've seen, and I think most of us have noticed, that in this pandemic situation, the acceptance of technologies, has, taken a leap step forward. Whether it's Zoom, whether it's machine learning, whether it's, being able to access data from outside your building, all these things that, for some of us were a little bit remote prior, now have become, almost part of our daily habit, I would say.
Thank you, Wiba. Great commentaries. Dr. Liran, what would be your key takeaways?
Yes, thank you. I think maybe it's kind of interesting where we are today, because in a way I'm here as the technology expert, but both of my colleagues, the FP&A expert, are talking about technology, and I think it says a lot for itself. But maybe another piece that the technology is enabling here is that we moved completely away with the pandemic from that concept of annual forecast or annual budget or quarterly one. What we see here is definitely the usage of technology to be able and literally predict the day-to-day changes, and not just the general trends or the general budget. And I think that's not less important than all the advanced capability to predict in a more accurate and efficient way.
Thank you so much, Liran. Thank you everyone for commentary. And Anand, thank you for sharing your case study with us. And now we would like to hear from our participants. So I'm launching the first polling question for today. As soon as you see the poll, I would like to ask our participants to start voting. So I'm launching the poll. What do you identify as the primary roadblock for your company's revenue planning this year? Is it market uncertainty? Is it a regulatory environment, supply chain challenges, understanding key business drivers, or cross-departmental collaboration? Please continue to vote. What is the most important roadblock for you? What is the most important problem for you, for your revenue management? I can see that more than 50% of you voted. Just a few seconds. I'm closing the poll and I'm sharing the results with everyone. We can see that more than half of you said that market uncertainty is one of the biggest barriers. Then the next one, those ones, regulatory, supply chain, understanding key drivers and cross-departmental collaboration, all of this almost even, but the majority is market uncertainty. Anand, what would be your reaction to this poll?
Well, certainly, I do agree with the outcome that the market certainty is a key player because it's a dynamic situation we are in, regardless of which sector we belong to. And I equally do agree with the restrictions that's coming in from regulatory landscape. Therefore, in my, from the sphere of where I work, I definitely think the top two are the key elements with respect to the travel industry.
Thank you so much for your commentary. Viba, anything surprises you here at this vote?
Yes, I would like, actually to call out one of the low scoring items here, the supply chain challenges, right? That actually surprises me that it is at a low score, because I know from some of the businesses that are different than the IT industry, where you have relatively low cost of goods sold, is that the challenges that they face nowadays on how to estimate and how to forecast either the prices or the goods that they have. And I think containers is one of the really good examples nowadays, is really a challenge for them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your commentaries. I'm hiding the results with thanks to all our participants. Thank you so much for your votes. So we looked at the case study from the industry that was the most affected by COVID-19 situation. Let us look at this amazing case study from Microsoft, regional CFO for multi-country Eastern Europe CFO. Viba Spekin is going to share how company completely automated revenue around the globe. Viba, before we start, I would like to say that for the first time, I had a presentation, your case study. It was in our Tokyo FP&A board launch in Japan, approximately 2.5 years ago, where your colleague presented the results. Now those results are even more impressive. So we're really looking forward to hear about your artificial intelligence enhanced revenue planning process. You're welcome. The microphone is yours.
Thank you so much. And again, right, I'm honored to be able to share this example with you. And before we start, I think it's really an interesting topic for me to talk about, because as the previous slide said, I'm roughly 20 years with Microsoft. I've worked on revenue forecast in a subsidiary position, in a regional position, but also on a worldwide position, right? And I think those three perspectives has kind of like blended my opinion and very supportive of where we are today and how we do it today at Microsoft. So if we move to the next slide, I think this is a visualization that many of us are very familiar with. Starting on the left-hand side, the forecast, in 9 out of 10 organizations driven by finance, starts, very few weeks before the quarter end. Hundreds of analysts started to build spreadsheets and making their assessments on the numbers that they have. So that's the first round, and the many hours that go into the forecast cycle. Then when that has been done, and most of the time after the quarter close and the sales, are all locked and loaded, as we say, the product teams and the sales teams are coming together and giving their, assessments on their outlook that, has been put together in first instance. Another round of meetings and many, even more senior hours are going to be put into this forecast. And then last, right, to finalize it, because it needs to be, signed off by the CFO, the HQ, and the finance team, there is another round of numbers, crunching, meetings, long hours of discussions, and actually, many hours are going to be put in that forecast again before it finally gets submitted. Now, if you really think about it, and the reason why we started to look into machine learning is actually on the next slide. If you think about it from an accuracy point of view, just imagine, right, the 3 rounds of, I would almost say negotiation or forecasting assessment that I just discussed on the previous slide, put a opinion or a judgment on the numbers, right? I think that is one. Then the second bullet, which I think is also very important, is the time to market. Let's think about it, right? If I think about the previous slide, I think a forecast cycle, in our company normally took probably 4 weeks prior to the close to 2 weeks after to the close, right? So that's about 6 weeks. It says 3 here, but I think it's even more, right? If you really look into it. So, that was kind of like really big. And then, efficiency. I talked about the previous slides where we put hundreds of hours in there. And when you look to the right-hand side of this slide, you can actually see, what machine learning has given us. It's really, the human bias that has been taken out, the efficiencies of making a forecast really quick, and actually the analysts can actually work on projects that have a bigger impact for finance. And let me give then a flavor of when I worked in the worldwide teams, we always got the field forecast where people put a lot of time and effort in, and then what we did is actually, at the corporate level, we assessed that forecast, and every time we had to make an assessment on that number and put a judgment in there, like up or down, to be able to come with a number that was more reliable for the organization. If you think about and want to understand how it works at Microsoft, let's go to the next slide, because basically what we're doing is that we're going to have 2 different kind of forecast. It should show a product slide and a sales forecast. It's on the next slide. It's not moving, at least my slide. Yeah, there it is. It's like, right. The product forecast is super important, because ultimately the products is what we sell to our customers and what is our customers need, right? So it's really good and important for us to understand, what are the different products, that we're trying to sell and our customer need. Then ultimately we bring that together with the sales, because of course, there is a pipeline, there is market data, there is, expiring revenue, recurring revenue, and all this data we put to make an assessment on the forecast. And I think the bottom part of this slide is actually super important, because even though we have machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is really a great add-on, it will never be the machine alone. Because, if I make a quick link to this pandemic situation that we're in, right? And you will see and understand that machine learning uses a lot of historical data. This pandemic we've never seen. And a product, like Teams, which, took a leap step forward, in this last time period, was something that, we had to assess ourselves. So I think it's super important that we realize is that human interaction, will be needed, but it will be needed in a different way. And that is also why I think in general, in finance, we need to look at the profile of people that we have, and they might be different from the past to what we need in the future. If you look to the next slide, you get a little bit of an insight, what took us to get there. And what really took us to get there is basically on this slide, and also a little bit of the outcomes. Now, first of all, when you start on the left-hand side of this slide, it is 10 years of revenue data. And I just called out something that is already known. Most of our companies have, recurring data, new business, we have expiring contracts, we have macroeconomic trends, we have new product launches. All this data is being used historically to determine what we need. Then, of course, you need to have the finance analyst to be able to talk with the data scientist, right? Because it's really important for the data scientist to understand how they should read and use the financial data that they have available. And that all together comes into a machine learning and gives you the opportunity to do a, more accurate, unbiased, factual forecast, I would almost say, because it's a bridge to the top middle part of this slide, where previous pre-machine learning, there was kind of like an adjustment to be made, of about 3% of each forecast rounds that we have. And currently we're actually at 1.5%, but actually, if I'm really honest, and I think this slide in all fairness is probably a couple of months or a couple of forecast cycles older, I think the accuracy actually has improved even better, right? Because you learn from the forecast rounds where you have been off, and you're able to correct that the next time. So just think about that, using machine learning, saving hundreds, thousands of hours of field resources will give you ultimately a better forecast. And this is really, one of the eye openers, but takes time to get buy-in from your business leaders and finance leaders to trust and to rely on the machine learning forecast. But there are so much gains there to make, and start using your finance resources for much more relevant and ROI driven projects. How many times in the past did we not spend on building the forecast and then explaining the forecast? So if I summarize it on the last slide that I have here, there's basically 3 things that I would like you to take away. It takes time. It's definitely not a journey that you can do in a month, in 6 months, or in a year. For Microsoft, it's really taken a couple of years to be able to convince the business leaders, the senior leadership team, but also actually the people in the field, that machine learning actually is a benefit. It saves you a lot of time. It gives you more accurate forecast number, and you can use your resources for different world. Secondly, technology. You need to have the right technology and a trust in the technology that it works. But what you could see from the presentation prior to this from Anand is that the technology is available. It's just how you can use it. And then thirdly, I think it's super important that you have buy-in from the business leaders, because ultimately forecasts and budgets are driving a large part of the sales cycles, and you want to make sure that what you report, potentially as an outlook to the street, or to make your own assessment for resources, is correct. So I would say time, technology, and business buy-in are the 3 essentials to be able to be successful at machine learning.
Wiebe, thank you so much. What an interesting presentation and case. I always say that if it's possible for one of the biggest companies in the world, for such a complex organization, it's a huge message for all of us in FP&A globally. And also, it's a very powerful message about the power of artificial intelligence and human intelligence. Just yesterday, we had a webinar exactly about this, so it's a very powerful message. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to ask our panelists to switch on the cameras and to comment, please. And I would like to ask Anand to start with your commentary.
Interesting insights, Wiebe. 2 observations from my side. Comprehending the machine learning forecast by human mind, I think, is important to avoid any black box effect. And as you rightly pointed out, I think stakeholder engagement and involvement and buy-in is extremely critical, given the fact that traditionally the machine learning forecast or technology-driven forecast wouldn't be accepted. So the buy-in is important. So these are 2 observations from my side.
Thank you, Anand. Liran?
Yes, thank you, Web. Great presentation. Maybe 2 points from my side as well. The first one, at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about the different groups that are dealing with the sales forecast. So I will be touching that as well, how you actually connect also between the product groups, the sales group, and the finance together. But maybe back from my experience about AI a little bit, I think sometimes it's also a matter of luck, right? Sometimes you get the data into the system, you run the AI prediction, and you get, good and fairly accurate results from the first pass. And sometimes, as you mentioned, it can take a few years. Doing that fine tuning, do you need 10 years of history or maybe just 10 months? Those kinds of stuff is part of the stuff that, we are doing. And fortunately, we have the machines and the capabilities and the software that allowing us to do it very quickly and not always with a deep knowledge. The main idea of predictive technology nowadays, especially for planning purposes, is to make sure that it's available for everyone. And by nature, at some other times, it takes a lot of time to get into more accurate results. And with that being said, my recommendation always for companies that just starting the journey, not like both of you that already well engaged with that, is, we usually say the AI prediction, for the first time is usually more for benchmarking purposes. So, I would say, hey, you can give it to run a few weeks, a few months, and to take it as a benchmark to your human intelligence, and later on decide, do you need really to fine tune that? Do you want to learn between the gaps and how to take it forward?
Thank you, Dr. Liran. Wiba, thank you for excellent presentation. Now this is the time to hear how revenue planning is done in the world of our members, our participants. I'm launching the second polling question, and we would like to understand what is the best description of your current revenue planning solution. Please, can you start to vote right now? Is it Excel, not driver-based model? Is it Excel but driver-based model? Is it a dedicated planning system, not driver-based model? Is it a dedicated planning system with driver-based model? Or is it already fully automated process with AI, ML, predictive prescriptive analytics? Please, can you continue to vote? More than 58%, more than 60%, just a few seconds. I'm closing the poll right now, and I'm sharing the results. And Wiba, as soon as you see the results, can you start commenting on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's the Excel and driver-based model, I think that is, I think this is the last step to me towards the machine learning model, I would say, right? Because this is how, I used to do it as well. And I think, the drivers can actually help you go into a machine learning mode. So it makes sense that I see that here.
But it's a pity for those 7% that have dedicated planning system, but not a driver-based model. Yeah, it's such a waste of resource, at least from my point of view. Thank you, Wiba. Dr. Liran, your commentaries on those results, please.
Well, by nature, as a technology vendor in the area, I see that there is still a lot of room to progress, and there's still a lot of companies that lacking the technology. But taking that to the next level, I think maybe to connect between a driver-based model and the fully automated process with AI and ML, I think it's important to have the AI and ML to the drivers, right? So we can definitely take a machine learning or AI model to predict our revenue or expenses or profitability, but we want it to predict actually the drivers themselves. So I think connecting between driver-based model and AI is also something important. And for those of you who are not there, keep it at the back of your mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for your commentary. I'm hiding the results. And this is the timing to go to the last presentation. And before I do this, I would like to say thank you so much to those that voted. Great, interesting ideas. So now we have Dr. Liran at the list, and the presentation is about technology-driven revenue planning. At the beginning of this meeting, we mentioned that obviously with this modern technology, revenue planning for FP&A becomes really strategic and influential discipline, and quite sophisticated as well. Liran, the floor is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Larissa. So in my presentation, I would like to speak about the broader term of revenue planning and sales planning in general. In order to set the ground for that, our first slide will speak about what our goals and how do we make sure that we create a sales planning excellence. So, we are starting as finance people, FP&A experts. We're always starting with our finance forecast, right? And we want them to be as accurate as possible. And we want to make sure that our plans are also contribute to our profitability or other business goals. So the next question would be like, how do we do that? How do we make sure that we have an accurate forecast? And that would be, as I mentioned before, it's looking about our business drivers. So we want to look at the key drivers that can allowing us to get into those goals. As an example, what is our product mix? How do we see the market grows in specific product and maybe decreasing in other, as well as, what our customers, how do we sell them, what our channels? So we want to make sure that the finance forecast is not just about the numbers, it's also about the drivers and the detailed planning that explain how we can get into the bottom line numbers. So the next piece would be, assuming we have that plan, we want to look at our processes, right, about our sales processes. And we want to make sure that if we are growing dramatically our sales, we have enough people to support that. So we want to do some capacity planning as well. That will give an impact, not just for the sales planning, but it will also give, the impact on profitability. So we want to look at capacity, sales cycles, and that would be, the next level of our sales planning. When we have salespeople, we want to make sure that we are keeping and managing our talents. So that comes to the commission plans that we offer to salespeople. Commission plans need to be accurate, needs to be transparent, and need to be going in one hand with our business plan. So if we have a specific product mix and we are not giving the same compensation for that product mix, it's a sort of a gap because we literally not compensate for the right motion. So we want to reach into a sales planning excellence that can connect between our final numbers that we want to see in our P&L, connect between our product, our customer mix, and the way we compensate and incentivize our sales people and talents in the sales organization. So what we are talking here is about a sort of a global approach that is taking us a little bit outside from the traditional finance perspective. Hey, just let's make sure that we have those numbers. And the question is, how do we achieve that? And the next slide will speak about the technology. So part of the digital transformation that we are talking about, and last time when I participated, we spoke about the expanded FP&A planning and analysis. This time, I want to remind a bit of those digital transformation goals. So the idea is we have complicated processes. And if you take the process in your organization, how you manage those incentive and compensation, how you look at the quota management of the sales team, and how do you look at the forecast, those are like three separate processes. Each one of them is fairly complicated. So the idea is with digital transformation, we want to simplify the process. And we want to make sure that different people with different responsibilities of the organization can speak together and make sure that they are collaborating with the data and the tools together. So with digital transformation, we want to take, maybe big process and make sure that we are not managing that as silos, as one process with different tools, different data points that can allow people to collaborate in a more efficient and accurate way. The challenge around that lies between the different levels of planning. And let's take the next slide to see about those different levels. So as FP&A expert, we all know that most of our planning in the FP&A group is a strategic planning that usually serves our shareholder, executive team, and so on. And our traditional processes in the FP&A are actual, budget, and forecast. That goes without say. And usually at large organizations, we will always start with a top-down approach where we want to say, those are the numbers we're expecting, and now we want to cascade them a little bit down. For our planning, for strategic planning, we look at high-level KPIs like year-over-year growth, margin, cost of acquisitions for customer, and as I mentioned, the different mixes, and definitely some market parameters like market share. Most of the FP&A teams working with, of course, their financial system, and some of them are enrich the data with CRM. So that's one piece of our sales planning. But if we want to reach into the concept that we have a full 360 degrees view on the process, and we want to incorporate with that also operational and tactical planning, then we need to take into consideration another process. Now we will add into the next slide, we are looking also at the operational level. And the operational level is literally not just strategic one by nature, but it's also looking about our Salesforce personnel and Salesforce processes. So that's the area where we want to have an observation about our incentives plan. And we want to feel if there are any relationship and correlations between our incentives plan and our business driver by nature. And those processes from the operational level, what makes them more different than what we used to do is that they are looking at the individual person, and that's, by nature, a bottom-up approach. But from that level, it's easy to say, okay, that's the bottom-up, that's the top-down. And if you want an accurate forecast, we can literally achieve that by alignment between those two levels. That alignment between operational level and strategic level is usually being done at the sales management. And we will see the sales management at the next one that is literally in between, and that's the level of sales managers that needs to tie between bottom-up planning and top-down planning. And those are the sales managers that are more in charge on the sales forecast, on the different capacity planning, and they are doing the sales territory management, channel management, span of control, and so on. So what you can see in this slide is literally, if you want to say we want to get a little bit outside of the Office of Finance, we want to look at expanded planning and analysis, and not just look at that specific area of finance planning, but we want to make sure that our finance and strategic planning is tied with operational and tactical manager. That's literally the expansion, and that's the full cycle that we should be looking at in order to get an alignment between the different goals and performance. So to take all of those together, what's what is the innovation behind that, and how we look at the traditional process versus that digital transformation. We will have the next slide that taking us into the digital transformation journey. So at the left side of my slide, you can see what are the challenges, and all of you, I'm sure, being affected by data silos, people that either have to extract the data from different systems, maybe some data that is not available for everyone, and definitely disconnected system. You've seen in the previous slide, by nature, CRM and ERP not always connected together. So from those data silos and disconnected system, we want to reach into a unified digital platform. We want to make sure that our planning platform is not just the strategic planning, but it can actually give us at least an observation, if not a full planning, also for tactical and operational planning. The next piece here is that we are looking at high-level target allocation. So that's, a lot of FP&A experts that I met with always saying, okay, we have the top-down targets, we just need to cascade them down. But what we want to do, and based on our survey just before my presentation, we've seen that a lot of people and a lot of organizations are still not using driver-based model. So we want to move from just, let's allocate or let's managing spreadsheet into a place where we can have a business model, a driver-based modeling, embedded with AI, predictive, and different capabilities of simulation. So that's kind of a shift from manual to smart, updated technology with driver-based planning. The other point is, lack of workflow and automation. We want, of course, to replace that with workflow. We want to make sure that when people are submitting their forecast, they're doing that in a timely manner. We want to make sure that submitting a forecast is not just, a workflow that someone hit, I submitted, but it also can be verified. And for those purposes, AI could be super useful as well. So we want to get the alerts out of that. And last but not least, I mentioned that after the first presentation, we are moving away, and we see that happening in a lot of organizations, from manual or quarterly forecasting to continuous real-time planning and forecasting. And we see the need of, immediate forecast almost at any time, because every day-to-day looks different than the previous one. So that was my presentation. I'm happy to answer and hear comments from my colleagues.
Dr. Liran, it's a great overview of what technology can do for modern revenue planning. Thank you for this. Especially important to remember about sophistication of bonus calculations. This is something that drives the culture, and it's so much important at the moment when we have to move away from traditional cultural budgeting. Thank you, Liran. I would like to ask our panelists to comment very quickly. Anand, what would be your subject matter on this?
Thank you, Dr. Liran. Another interesting perspective. Just one key observation from my side, and I would like to re-emphasize that continuous and flexible planning horizon is extremely important to address the dynamic changes in the business climate that's happening all through the year. So I really would like to emphasize that.
Yeah, the point that I would like to emphasize, which we touched on in all the presentations, is the importance of alignment between the different teams who are either impacted or driving the forecast cycles. It's again a combination of technology and people, I would say.
Thank you so much, Wiebe. Thank you so much, Liran, for your excellent presentation. I would like to ask you to stay, because now we would like to ask you to give your 30 seconds key takeaways from this session before we start Q&A session. And before we start Q&A session, just a quick reminder to all our participants to send your questions. We already have a lot of them, but please continue to send. If we don't have time to answer all of them, we will get back to you through email. Thank you, and let us start with these key takeaways. Anand, your 30 seconds, please.
Two key takeaways from my perspective: an agile team is extremely important, who can do a war room approach, very important. And the second one is don't shy away from using technology. It plays a critical role in particularly that changes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Anand. Viba, your key takeaways?
I would say technology will help you more and more in driving the forecast. Human interactions and human knowledge will always be needed. I think the big benefit that you can take away from it is, besides more accurate forecast, is that you can actually use the finance resources for bigger and better ROI projects that they, can really have and drive an impact on.
Thank you. Fantastic takeaways. Dr. Liran, your 30 seconds, please. Liran, you are on mute. Can you unmute, please?
So I hope that this presentation and the session here is helping you with the roadmap of technology and digital transformation. I think that this become more and more roles of FP&A, even more than the technology expert, to set the expectation where technology needs to take them, whether that's AI, whether that's expanding the technology across the organization, whether that give the guidelines. So I think each and every expert here needs to think about his organization roadmap to digital transformation with his FP&A team and company.
Thank you so much. Great reminders, Dr. Liran. Now I would like to announce the start of our Q&A session. Please continue to send your questions via the text box. And the first question is to you, Anand. A very interesting one, actually. Anand, very interesting. Can you comment if Emirates had as a scenario such event as a COVID prior it's occurred?
Come again, I didn't get the question, Larissa.
The question is, when you played scenarios before COVID situation, before we all knew what is ahead of us, did you have something like this? Did you play scenario that there will be situation when you wouldn't be able to fly for more than 1 year?
Absolutely not. I don't think a doomsday scenario was ever planned. So this is something that's taken all of us by shock. But that gives a significant amount of learnings for all of us, because this is something my boss tells me that he hasn't seen anything of this sort in the last 60 years thereabouts. So therefore, this is all good learning. But I think the quick answer from me would be, you don't need to really confront a specific situation as far as you truly understand what drives the current issue and set out a plan on an agile basis. We should be able to confront.
Thank you so much. It's definitely a black swan, yes, so nobody anticipated this. Thank you for your answer. Wiebe, the next question is to you, also quite interesting question. Thank you, Wiebe, for pointing out for the interaction and combination of machine learning and of machine and human intelligence. How we can come to the balancing point, how we can balance all of those forces together. What would be your advice on this?
My first thought would be, yeah, that's the $1 million question, right? But in all fairness, I think it's a fail and learn effort. I think the whole machine learning and drive to technology support is something that we are all starting and we all need to learn. And when you get there, you'll make mistakes. You either still use too much human interaction and not enough technology, till a point where you probably use too much technology and not enough human support. And somewhere you're going to find that sweet spot. And that is, I think, part of what I mentioned. There is a time impact to this journey. It will not happen overnight, and partly that is because we all need to learn. So I don't have an answer to what is that sweet spot, but I think we should not be afraid to make mistakes and learn. And one of the things that we did in our time is that we actually ran machine learning forecast cycles in parallel with the legacy forecasting cycles from the field, just to see how close they were, where the differences are. And with that was already a good learning process done before we went worldwide with the machine learning.
Thank you, Wiebe. Thank you so much. Great answer. Dr. Liran, the next question is to you. Thank you for sharing with us your revenue planning experience. What would be your advice on convincing the top management that it's a time now to change the revenue planning process and also to invest in technology? What would you advise?
I think that from a senior management perspective, it's ties together, right? You cannot really disconnect the technology from the planning nowadays. You want to have the data streamlined, you want to have the process streamlined, and you want to have the different models streamlined together. So I think that the mindset here is to make sure that you have the right process in place, you have the right business model, and then you have the technology to enable that. So technology cannot start before the business process, but it should support that. So I would definitely say that you want to take the business process and the technology together to the next level of excellence in the organization.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Liran. Great answer. And now I would like to give to all of you the final question, a very interesting question that came from our audience. What would be the most critical first few steps to take a young or an immature organization to this planning of to modern revenue planning process? So what would be your recommendation, the first steps? Anand, let us start from your first steps, please.
I think the important thing is to understand the business challenges that we'll be faced with. So the revenue planning or revenue management plays a critical role, provided you understand the business complexities. And the question is also whether, how complex is the business, whether, if it's very complex and if it cannot be dealt with a human mind, then introduction of technology will play a key role in that. So therefore, my advice would be, so understand the business and then you can set the revenue management process effectively on top of that.
Thank you, Anand. Wiba?
I think it's very much aligned to what Anand said. Understand your, I would say, revenue or business drivers, because that would be, the first step that you need to have to make that change. And in the meantime, start engaging with your senior stakeholders on the journey that you're on, because it takes time, and it takes time to convince people for them to accept that technology really can be a help.
Thank you, Wiba. Dr. Liran?
Yeah, so we usually look at 3 stages, and the first stage is automate. So make sure that you can automate the manual processes first, so it can take out of your plate all of those manual work, like extracting data from different systems. Automate. Then is the collaboration, start to speak with other people, get the business driver, put them in place, on top of the automation that you already created. And last would be the transformation that include most of those intelligent tool, AI, and so on. So follow those 3 steps, and most important, make sure you start somewhere, right? But not hold your decision to start.
Thank you so much, dear panelists. Great answers, great presentations. With this, I would like to conclude our Q&A session. But please, I would like to ask everyone to stay. Just a few announcements for all of you. Thank you so much. Please, can you continue to send your questions? Because as I said, we will be able to tackle them after the meeting. And now just a few announcements. We are working on a number of interesting webinars, and I would like to invite you to Digital North American FP&A board about FP&A business partnering subject, and also about predictive analytics FP&A trends webinar. And finally, before we conclude, I would like to say thank you so much to our technology sponsor for today, JEDEX, the company that provides modern FP&A technology. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for your great support. You have a contact here, Dr. Liran. If you have any questions, you can contact him. I would like to say thank you so much to our fantastic panelists. So Anand, Wiba, Dr. Liran, such a great job. Thank you so much. And finally, I would like to say to those hundreds of participants from around the globe that join us today, Thank you for being with us, and we're always looking forward to hear from you. You know how to find us. Let us stay connected, and any case studies, any thought leadership, any ideas, we're really interested to hear from you. And please stay connected with us. You know how to do this through our groups, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, many other ways how we can do this. And please stay alert about our best practice webinars and FP&A boards as well. So now, when I finish this meeting, please, if you can stay and share your survey, answer the questions how we can make this webinar better, it would be really appreciated. But with this, I would like once again to say thank you so much to everyone, and I hope that I will see you very soon. All the best. Anna,
Thank you.
Liba, Liran, see you very soon. Bye-bye.